What does it cost to build an empire? For Elias Thornwood, it wasn't just blood, sweat, or ambition, it was a promise. A promise to dismantle the very system that crushed his father. But today, as the CEO of a financial powerhouse, he's about to confront a chilling truth. His own company is perpetuating the injustice he swore to destroy. Sometimes, the hardest battle is the one you fight against yourself. Hit subscribe now to join Elias on a journey where power, legacy, and redemption collide. And discover why true success demands more than just winning. The city of Austin hummed with life, its towering glass structures reflecting the fiery hues of a Texas sunset. In one of those buildings on the top floor of Lone Star Credit Union's headquarters, Elias Thornwood sat behind a grand mahogany desk, staring at the skyline. He had built this empire with his own hands, turning a modest financial institution into one of the most influential credit unions in the country. Yet, for all his success, a shadow of unease loomed over him, one that even the gleaming walls of his office could not keep out. Elias was not merely a businessman. He was a man on a mission. Every decision he made, every policy he enforced, stemmed from an unshakable purpose: to dismantle the barriers that had once held his father back. His father, Malcolm Thornwood, had been a brilliant entrepreneur, but brilliance alone had not been enough. Malcolm had been denied loans, treated unfairly, and ultimately driven into financial ruin, not because of poor business acumen, but because of the color of his skin. Elias had spent decades trying to right that wrong, clawing his way to the top of an industry that had once crushed his father. Now he was the CEO of one of Texas's most reputable financial institutions, yet deep down he still questioned whether he had truly made a difference. The phone on his desk buzzed. Elias ignored it. He needed a moment to think. The weight of legacy. His childhood had been shaped by the quiet resilience of his father and the silent sacrifices of his mother. Growing up, Elias had watched Malcolm meticulously draft business plans at the kitchen table, only to return days later with rejection letters. Not the right fit, they always said. Not enough collateral. But Elias had known the truth. His father had been seen as a risk, not because of his business but because of systemic bias. That bitter reality had driven Elias to work harder than anyone else. He excelled in school, won scholarships, and pursued finance with relentless determination. By the time he was 35, he had climbed to the top of the corporate ladder, but he never forgot where he came from. He never forgot the indignity his father had suffered. Even now, sitting in his plush leather chair, Elias could hear his father's voice in his mind. Success means nothing if it doesn't change the world for someone else. And that was the problem. Had he changed anything at all? A plan in motion. A sharp knock on the door jolted him from his thoughts. It was Cassandra, his chief of staff, a no-nonsense woman with sharp instincts and an even sharper tongue. She entered without waiting for an invitation, her expression expectant. "You've been brooding, Elias." "I don't brood." "You do when you're planning something," she countered, crossing her arms. "What's on your mind?" He exhaled slowly. "I need to see it for myself." "See what?" "The way my institution treats people who don't walk in here wearing a tailored suit." He leaned back, his fingers steepled. "Numbers and reports can only tell me so much. I need to experience it firsthand." Cassandra raised an eyebrow. "You want to go undercover?" He nodded. "I'm going to be a customer, a nobody. Walk into a branch, ask for a simple service, and see how they treat me." She tilted her head, considering. "You could just send an auditor." "Too obvious," Elias said. "I need the raw, unfiltered truth." Cassandra smirked. "You always did have a flair for the dramatic. The transformation." The next morning, Elias stood before the mirror in his penthouse, unrecognizable even to himself. His usual tailored suit had been replaced by a mismatched ensemble: an outdated blazer, a wrinkled shirt, and a pair of scuffed shoes. His perfectly groomed beard was left slightly untamed, and oversized glasses obscured his sharp gaze. The final touch was an old, dented sedan parked in his private garage, a stark contrast to the sleek vehicles he normally drove. He studied his reflection. Would anyone recognize him? Would his own employees look past the exterior and see a man deserving of respect? Or would they reduce him to nothing more than an inconvenience? He inhaled deeply. It was time to find out. With one last glance at the skyline, the empire he had built. Elias Thornwood stepped away from the life of a CEO and into the shoes of an ordinary man. The streets of Cedar Park buzzed with the usual mid-morning activity. Commuters rushed to work, parents herded children into schools, and business owners flipped signs from closed to open. Elias drove his battered sedan through the suburban sprawl, his hands gripping the worn-out steering wheel as he approached Lone Star Credit Union's Cedar Park branch. The building itself was unassuming, red brick, large tinted windows, and a standard bank logo gleaming above the entrance. It was a stark contrast to the grandeur of the headquarters he had left behind. He parked at the far end of the lot, taking a moment to adjust his appearance in the rearview mirror. The suit he wore had creases in all the wrong places, the once crisp white shirt now dulled to an off-white. He tugged at the frayed cuff of his sleeve, ensuring he looked every bit the part of an average customer, perhaps even a struggling one. Taking a deep breath, Elias stepped out of the car and into an entirely different world. First impressions. As he entered the bank, the cool air conditioning washed over him, a sharp contrast to the lingering Texas heat outside. The lobby was bright and modern, but beneath the polished floors and pristine counters, there was a hum of forced enthusiasm. Employees moved with a mechanical efficiency, their eyes flickering between customers and the ever-present screen displays tracking performance metrics. A young teller stood behind the counter, her auburn hair neatly tied into a bun. Her name tag read Marigold Whitaker. As soon as Elias approached, her practiced customer service smile clicked into place. "Good morning, sir. Welcome to Lone Star Credit Union. How can I help you today?" Elias returned her smile, keeping his voice steady but tinged with uncertainty. "I'd like to withdraw some cash, about $500. Marigold's eyes brightened as she launched into a well-rehearsed pitch. "Of course. But before we do that, may I interest you in our Platinum credit card? You'll get an introductory 0% interest rate, plus access to exclusive investment opportunities." Elias fought the urge to sigh. So this was how it was going to be. "I appreciate the offer," he said smoothly, "but I just need the cash." Marigold hesitated for a fraction of a second before recovering. "Absolutely. But if you're withdrawing this amount frequently, you might benefit from our investment packages. We have a gold tier plan that could maximize your savings." Elias cut her off with a polite shake of his head. "Just the cash, please." Her smile dimmed slightly, but she nodded and proceeded with the transaction. As she worked, he noticed her glance up at a digital screen mounted on the wall behind her. It displayed employee rankings, customer sign-ups, and a bold red number labeled daily sales quota. The pressure was tangible. Escalation. As Marigold counted out the bills, a shadow fell over the counter. A tall, broad-shouldered man in a dark suit had appeared beside her. His presence carried authority, and his expression was one of wary scrutiny. His name tag read Orson Pike, branch manager. "Good morning, sir," Orson greeted, his voice deep and measured. "I see you're making a withdrawal. That's quite a sum. May I ask if you're a long-time customer?" Elias kept his expression neutral. "I've had an account here for a while." Orson's gaze flickered over Elias's worn-out attire and outdated accessories. "Do you have any additional forms of identification?" "Just a precaution, of course. We take security very seriously." Elias stiffened internally. The implication was clear. He was being profiled. "I have my ID right here," he said calmly, handing it over. Orson examined it closely, his fingers lingering a second too long before nodding. "Everything seems in order," he said, handing it back. "However, before you leave, I'd love to take a moment to discuss our financial security programs. Given the amount you're withdrawing, you might be at risk of theft or fraud. We offer protection plans that could really benefit you." Elias tilted his head. "Are you suggesting that withdrawing my own money is dangerous?" Orson smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Not at all. Just looking out for our valued customers." Elias glanced at Marigold, who stood uncomfortably beside them, her fingers twitching. He could see it now. This wasn't personal, this was systemic. Employees weren't mistreating customers out of bias alone. They were being pushed, forced into aggressive sales tactics that blurred the line between assistance and coercion. "I'll pass on the protection plan," Elias said evenly, taking his cash. "Thank you." Orson hesitated for a split second before giving a clipped nod. Of course. Have a great day. A realization. As Elias stepped out into the bright Texas sun, his mind was already racing. The issue was deeper than he had anticipated. It wasn't just about customer treatment. It was about a toxic corporate culture that incentivized predatory behavior. This wasn't just an experiment anymore. This was a problem that needed fixing. Elias sat in his car for a long moment, the engine idling beneath his fingers. The crisp bills in his hand were proof enough that Lone Star Credit Union still functioned as a bank. But that wasn't what concerned him. What troubled him was how swiftly the interaction had shifted from basic service to predatory sales tactics. He had expected a degree of skepticism toward an unassuming man withdrawing a substantial sum. He had anticipated the subtle differences in how a customer of his apparent status might be treated. But what he had not foreseen was the sheer pressure employees faced. An internal culture so fixated on quotas that staff were willing to blur ethical lines to meet their targets. Elias wasn't just dealing with individual prejudice. He was dealing with an institutional flaw, and that meant he needed to push further. A second attempt. Rather than leaving, Elias decided to test the system again. This time, he would not only observe but deliberately provoke the pressure points in their process. He stepped out of the car, adjusted his oversized glasses and re-entered the branch. Marigold was still at her station. The moment she saw him, her polite smile faltered. Just for a second, before she quickly masked it with professionalism. Orson Pike was nowhere in sight, but Elias knew it wouldn't take much to summon him again. He approached Marigold's counter and leaned in slightly, as if hesitant. I was thinking, he murmured. Maybe I should consider one of those investment packages after all. Instantly, her eyes lit up, relief flooding her expression. Oh, absolutely, sir. I'd be happy to go over our options with you. She gestured toward a row of consultation desks at the far end of the lobby. Elias hesitated before nodding, allowing himself to be led to a small, glass-enclosed space. He could feel the energy in the room shift, the other tellers stealing glances, an air of anticipation settling over the branch. A potential big sale was unfolding. Marigold sat across from him, flipping through a branded brochure. Her hands moved quickly, her voice picking up speed. So we have 3 tiers: silver, gold, and platinum. The gold plan is our most popular, with an annual return rate that's significantly higher than standard savings accounts. If you invest today, I can even get you a waived maintenance fee for the first 6 months. Elias leaned back, feigning uncertainty. That does sound good, but I'm not sure I can commit just yet. Her smile didn't waver. That's perfectly fine, sir. But if I may ask, what are your financial goals? Are you saving for retirement? A major purchase? He hesitated. Just trying to be smart with my money. She nodded. That's exactly why this is such a great opportunity. The longer you wait, the more potential interest you're missing out on. Elias folded his arms. What if I just want to keep my money where it is? For the first time, Marigold's composure cracked. She glanced at the digital sales quota screen again. Elias noticed her fingers twitch slightly against the edge of the table. Of course, sir, she said, but the warmth in her tone was strained now. But if I may, our platinum clients receive concierge banking services, which would ensure. I think I'll pass, Elias interrupted gently. I appreciate the information, though. Marigold opened her mouth as if to push further, but then, the interruption. A heavy hand landed on the glass door. Orson Pike. He pushed the door open with a practiced, authoritative ease and stepped inside. His suit was impeccable, his graying hair neatly combed back, his expression the picture of corporate courtesy, with just a hint of impatience beneath the surface. Mr. He hesitated, pretending to recall the name from memory. Mr. Thorne, wasn't it? Elias nodded slowly. I couldn't help but notice that you're considering one of our premier financial packages, Orson continued, lowering himself into the chair beside Marigold. May I ask what's holding you back? Elias met his gaze evenly. Just weighing my options. Orson smiled, though it didn't reach his eyes. That's fair. But let me offer some insight. Most of our high-net-worth clients see these investments as a necessity, rather than an option. Elias didn't respond immediately. He let the silence stretch just long enough for discomfort to creep in. Orson shifted slightly. I'd hate for you to miss out on something that could be incredibly beneficial. And let's be honest, in your situation, every bit of security counts. There it was again. The subtext. Elias tapped a finger on the table. And what exactly do you mean by my situation? Orson gave a small chuckle. I simply mean financial security is crucial for everyone. Especially for those who might not have as many. He paused, choosing his words carefully. Pre-existing safety nets. Marigold was sitting unnaturally still now. Her hands folded tightly in her lap. Elias could feel the tension radiating off her. He exhaled slowly. This was going even deeper than he thought. Turning the tables. Elias leaned forward. So let me get this straight. If I walk in here wearing a tailored suit, no one bats an eye when I withdraw my own money. But if I come in looking like a regular guy, suddenly I need to be protected. Orson's smile remained frozen. I assure you, sir, that's not. You're not concerned about my security, Elias continued, his voice calm but firm. You're concerned about meeting your quotas. You're not offering me an investment because you think it's best for me. You're doing it because it's best for you. A long silence followed. Marigold looked like she wanted to sink into the floor. Orson's jaw tightened just slightly. Then Elias reached up and slowly pulled off his oversized glasses. The shift in Orson's expression was almost imperceptible, but it was there. A flicker of recognition, of realization. Elias met his gaze directly. I think we both know who I am now. Orson paled. Marigold gasped. And the real confrontation had only just begun. A heavy silence settled over the small consultation room. The air felt thick, charged with the weight of unspoken words. Orson Pike's confident demeanor faltered as recognition dawned in his eyes. Marigold's face was a picture of shock, her hands gripping the edge of the desk as if bracing herself for an impact. Elias Thornwood had dropped his disguise. His sharp, calculating gaze met Orson's, and for the first time in their interaction, the branch manager looked genuinely unsure of himself. I, Orson stammered, his usual smooth composure cracking. You seem surprised, Mr. Pike, Elias said evenly, adjusting his blazer. It's a strange thing, isn't it? Just a moment ago, you were quite certain of how to handle me. Orson swallowed. Mr. Thornwood, I wonder, Elias continued, his voice calm but razor-sharp. How many others have sat in this chair and been treated exactly as I was, coerced, manipulated, made to feel like they had no choice but to take whatever opportunity was forced upon them? Marigold sucked in a breath, her eyes darting between them. I didn't know, she blurted out. I mean, I was just doing what you were told, Elias finished for her. His tone wasn't unkind, but it carried an undeniable weight. I don't doubt that, Marigold. But tell me this. Did you ever feel like you had a choice? She hesitated, her fingers tightening against the desk. Her voice was barely above a whisper when she answered. No. Orson's jaw clenched. Sir, I assure you we only follow company policy. These practices are standard across the industry. That, Elias interrupted, is precisely the problem. Breaking the system. Elias stood, moving with the slow precision of a man who had already decided the course of action he was going to take. He glanced at Marigold, then at Orson. The branch manager had gone rigid, his mind clearly racing for a way to salvage the situation. You push employees into a corner, Elias said, stepping away from the desk. You pit them against arbitrary quotas. You make customers the prey and sales the only measure of success. Orson started to speak, but Elias raised a hand, cutting him off. You saw a man who didn't fit your idea of a high-value customer and immediately categorized him as either a target or a liability, Elias continued. And it's not just you. It's the entire system you've been forced to operate in. Orson let out a slow breath. His confidence was returning, if only in fragments. Mr. Thornwood, with all due respect, that's how the business works. We have targets to meet. If we don't meet them, jobs are on the line. Elias gave a dry chuckle. I know, because I set those targets. Orson froze. Marigold's eyes widened even further. I built this company, Elias continued. I thought I was making it better, more efficient. More competitive. His expression darkened. Instead, I created a machine that rewards aggression and punishes integrity. A long silence stretched between them. Finally, Orson spoke, his voice low. What happens now? Restructuring the future. Elias exhaled, running a hand over his face. Things are going to change. Orson straightened slightly. Are you saying you're going to overhaul the entire structure? Elias finished for him. Yes. Marigold let out a small gasp. Orson's expression turned unreadable, his mind clearly calculating what this would mean for him, and for the company as a whole. You'll fight resistance, Orson warned. Investors. Executives. You'll be dismantling an entire system that's been in place for years. Elias smiled grimly. Then it's long overdue. He turned to Marigold. You don't have to work under this kind of pressure anymore. Tears welled in her eyes, but she quickly blinked them away. Thank you, sir. Elias faced Orson one last time. I'm not here to destroy your career, but you need to decide what kind of leader you want to be. Orson's jaw tightened. Then slowly he nodded. I understand. Elias gave him a curt nod in return. Good. Because everything changes today. The boardroom at Lone Star Credit Union's headquarters had never been quieter. The tension in the air was palpable. An unspoken challenge bouncing between the executives seated at the polished oak table. Some had their hands folded neatly in front of them. Others clenched their pens with white-knuckled grips. They had seen Elias Thornwood furious before, but never like this. Elias sat at the head of the table, his fingers tapping against the surface in a slow, deliberate rhythm. He had called this emergency meeting the moment he left the Cedar Park branch, and now, he was ready to dismantle the system he had unknowingly built. Orson Pike sat a few seats down, his usual air of confidence subdued. Marigold Whitaker, looking equal parts nervous and determined, had been invited as well, an unusual but necessary choice. If anyone needed to witness this change firsthand, it was her. Elias cleared his throat, and the room fell into complete silence. We have a problem. His voice was calm, but the weight behind it was unmistakable. I walked into one of my own branches yesterday, he continued, scanning the room, and I was treated as a target rather than a customer. I was manipulated, pressured, and at one point, subtly profiled based on nothing more than my appearance. A murmur of discomfort rippled through the table. Elias leaned forward. But let's be clear, this isn't about one branch. It's about the culture we've created. A system where sales quotas matter more than service. Where employees aren't given the tools to succeed, unless it involves pushing products onto people who don't need them. Where managers, he shot Orson a glance, feel so pressured to perform that they cross ethical lines without hesitation. Orson inhaled sharply but remained silent. This ends now. Redefining success. Elias gestured toward the stack of reports in front of him. Effective immediately, we're eliminating hard sales quotas as the primary measure of employee performance. Instead, we're shifting to a model that prioritizes customer experience. One of the executives, a tall man in a navy suit, frowned. Elias, with all due respect, our profitability depends on sales. If we remove incentives, we're not removing incentives, Elias interrupted. We're redefining them. Employees will be rewarded for customer satisfaction, retention, and ethical service. Not for the number of credit cards they force on people. Another executive spoke up, her expression skeptical. Do you really think that's sustainable? Elias met her gaze. I think exploiting customers isn't. Silence. A new path. Marigold shifted slightly in her chair, and Elias turned to her. You've been on the front lines of this. What do you think? She hesitated before speaking, clearly aware of the eyes on her. I think, she swallowed. I think most of us just wanted to do our jobs well. But we were given the wrong goals. A slow nod spread around the table. The reality was sinking in. Orson exhaled and finally spoke. You're right. He sat up straighter. I should have seen it. Instead, I let the pressure dictate my decisions. I let fear drive my leadership. Elias studied him for a moment before nodding. Then let's fix it. The announcement. 2 days later, Elias stood before a packed auditorium filled with Lone Star Credit Union employees. Screens behind him displayed the words, "A new era of banking." He took a deep breath, then addressed the room. For too long, the banking industry has operated under one assumption, that success is measured in numbers, not people. He paused. "We're going to prove that wrong." A ripple of murmurs spread through the crowd. "We're shifting focus. No more aggressive sales tactics. No more pressure to meet quotas that compromise integrity. From now on, your success will be measured by how well you serve, not how much you sell." A hush fell over the audience. Elias continued, "It won't be easy. Change never is. But I promise you this, when we look back a year from now, we won't just be a better company. We'll be an example of what banking should be." A single clap echoed through the room. Then another. And another. The applause swelled, filling the space with something Elias hadn't heard in a long time. Elias Thornwood thought he'd already won. But the hardest choice, the one that will define his legacy, is only beginning. Will he sacrifice his empire to save its soul? Or will the shadows of the past consume him first? Subscribe to witness the revolution and ask yourself, what would you risk for justice?